Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I always thought my parents were my biggest cheerleaders, until I found out they were saving for my brother's future, not mine. I'll never forget that day. I was back home for a long weekend, helping my parents clean out the attic. Mom had been nagging me for months to help sort through old junk, and honestly, I was doing it more to shut her up than anything else. It wasn't exactly how I wanted to spend my Saturday, but what could I say? Guilt trips have always been her specialty. The attic was a dusty mess of old photo albums, boxes of Christmas decorations, and random knickknacks they'd kept since before I was born. Somewhere between sneezing from the dust and laughing at some ancient photo of me with a bowl cut, I found a small, locked filing cabinet tucked behind a stack of boxes. "Mom, what's this?" I shouted down the stairs. "Oh, that's just old paperwork," she yelled back. "Nothing interesting. Leave it." Her answer was too quick, her tone too dismissive. My gut told me there was something more. I'd always been curious, sometimes to my own detriment, so naturally I looked for the key. After a few minutes of digging through drawers, I found it taped to the underside of the cabinet itself. Not exactly a high-security setup. The lock clicked open, and I pulled out a stack of papers. At first, it seemed like nothing, a mix of utility bills, tax forms, and other boring adult stuff. But then, I found the folder. The one labeled with my brother's name, Ethan, in neat black Sharpie. Inside, there were bank statements, tuition receipts, and a ledger my dad had clearly kept over the years. My eyes scanned the page, and that's when I saw it. Thousands of dollars transferred out of their savings account, all marked for Ethan's law school. I froze. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe this wasn't their main savings account. Maybe it was extra money they'd saved specifically for him. But as I flipped through the papers, the ugly truth began to unravel. They hadn't just contributed to Ethan's education. They had drained everything. Every dollar they'd ever promised me. Every dime I'd naively thought was waiting for me to start college had been funneled into his future instead. My mind raced. Memories of them telling me not to worry about money, that they had it covered, played on a cruel loop. "You don't need to stress about scholarships, honey. Focus on your grades," they used to say. Those words felt like poison now. I slammed the drawer shut and stumbled back, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it downstairs. For a moment, I thought about confronting them right then and there, but I stopped myself. I needed a minute to process it all. When I finally went downstairs, I must have looked pale because Mom immediately asked, "Are you okay?" I managed a weak smile and muttered something about allergies from the dust. But inside, I was boiling. Every glance in their direction felt like a betrayal. How could they sit there, acting so casual, knowing what they'd done? I spent the rest of the weekend pretending everything was fine, but I couldn't stop replaying what I'd found. It wasn't just the money, it was the lies. All those years they'd promised me a future they had no intention of providing. And for what? Because Ethan was older? Because he was their golden child? By the time I left on Sunday, I was a mix of anger and heartbreak. I didn't even hug them goodbye. As I drove back to my apartment, tears blurred my vision. I wasn't just sad. I was furious. How long had they been lying to me? How could they look me in the eyes every day and make me believe they had my back? I spent the entire drive asking myself the same question over and over. If they were willing to sacrifice my future for his, what did that say about how they really felt about me? Growing up, I genuinely believed my family was like any other. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. My parents, Dad working in construction and Mom as a school secretary, never let us feel like we were missing out. At least that's what I thought. They often told me and my older brother, Ethan, how hard they worked to make sure we'd have better lives than they did. "We do this for you too," Mom would say, usually over dinner. "Every late night, every penny we save, it's all for your future." Back then I bought it. I was just a kid after all. When you're young, your parents are your whole world. You trust what they tell you because you have no reason not to. I vividly remember one dinner when Ethan was in high school, and I was about 12. He'd just gotten accepted into a university. It wasn't Harvard or anything, but it was still impressive. Mom and Dad were beaming with pride. "We're so proud of you, Ethan," Dad said, clapping him on the back. "You're going to do great things." I remember feeling excited for him, too. I looked up to Ethan. He was the golden boy of our family. Smart, hardworking, and always so sure of what he wanted. I was the creative one, the dreamer, always drawing pictures or writing little stories in the margins of my school notebooks. "Am I going to college too?" I asked, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves as I looked at Mom. She smiled warmly, almost laughing at my question. Of course you are, sweetheart. We're saving for you both. That moment stuck with me. It felt like a promise, one I carried with me for years. I'd hear variations of it throughout my childhood. Don't worry about money, or we've got it covered. It was like this comforting mantra that made me feel safe. But now, looking back, it's hard not to see those words as a cruel joke. Ethan always got a little extra attention, but I didn't think much of it at the time. He was older, after all. When he joined debate club, Mom and Dad attended every competition, cheering loudly from the stands. When he got his first car, an old, beat-up sedan, it was a family event. I remember helping Dad wash it in the driveway and thinking, one day, that'll be me. But when I turned 16 and asked about getting a car, Dad told me we couldn't afford it. You can take the bus, he said, like it was no big deal. I was disappointed, but didn't complain. It was just one of those things, right? There were other moments, too. Like the time Ethan needed money for a summer pre-law program, and Dad wrote him a check without a second thought. That same summer, I asked for a smaller amount to attend an art camp, and the answer was no. We have to prioritize, Mom said. Ethan's program is more important right now. At the time, it made sense. Ethan's path seemed more serious, more practical. Art camp was just for fun, wasn't it? But looking back, it feels like the start of a pattern I was too young to recognize. Even when it came to emotional support, Ethan seemed to get more. If he had a problem, the whole family stopped to help him solve it. If I had one, the response was more like, you'll figure it out. They didn't say it to be cruel, but it still stung. I don't think my parents ever meant to make me feel less important. They probably thought they were doing what was best for the family. But their actions told a different story. The moments that once felt reassuring now feel tainted. Every time they told me not to worry about money, every time they said they were saving for my future, I believed them. I trusted them. And that trust shaped how I saw myself and my place in the world. But now, I wonder, was it all a lie from the beginning? Did they ever intend to save for me? Or did they just decide somewhere along the way that I wasn't worth it? It's a question that keeps me awake some nights. The kind that gnaws at you, even when you know you'll never get a real answer. As a kid, I didn't see the favoritism for what it was. I brushed off every slight, every "we'll get to you later," as normal family dynamics. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, it feels like a slow accumulation of betrayals, building to the moment I found those bank statements and realized the truth. I think that's what hurts the most, not just the broken promises, but the fact that I was so blind to it for so long. I wanted to believe my parents were doing right by me. I wanted to believe their sacrifices were for both of us. Now, I can't help but wonder, did they lie to me all those years because it was easier than admitting the truth, or did they genuinely think I'd never notice? Either way, the result was the same. They built my world on promises they never planned to keep, and I was the fool who believed them. It started out like any other visit home. Awkward, slightly forced, but polite enough to avoid stirring any trouble. My relationship with my parents wasn't exactly strained, but it wasn't warm and fuzzy either. It had been like that for years. Mom had asked me to help clean out the basement. She said they were thinking about downsizing and wanted to get a head start on decluttering. I figured it was harmless enough. Plus, I felt a little guilty for not visiting more often. Maybe this was my chance to smooth things over. The basement was cold and musty, a time capsule of our lives in neatly stacked plastic bins. There were boxes labeled Christmas, camping gear, and old books, but one bin caught my eye, financial records. I paused. It wasn't like me to snoop, but curiosity got the better of me. I popped the lid off and started rifling through the folders inside. Most of it was boring. Old tax returns, car insurance documents, receipts for home repairs. But then I found something that made my stomach drop. A folder with Ethan's name written in big, bold letters. I froze, staring at it for what felt like minutes. Part of me wanted to shove it back in the bin and pretend I hadn't seen it, but my hands moved on their own. I opened the folder. Inside were receipts, bank statements, and handwritten notes. I flipped through the first few pages, and a sickening pattern began to emerge. There it was, in black and white. Thousands of dollars transferred out of their savings account, all marked as payments for Ethan's law school. I kept reading, my heart racing faster with every page. Each statement was like a punch to the gut. Notes scribbled in my dad's handwriting said things like priority, Ethan's tuition, and future investment. Worth it? The word priority jumped out at me again and again, like it had been written in neon. Priority. Not me. Not my future. Him. I sank to the floor, the folder still clutched in my hands. My chest felt tight like I couldn't breathe, My mind raced through years of memories, all the times they told me not to worry about money, that they had everything handled. Every promise they made came flooding back, each one now dripping with betrayal. I thought about the summers I'd worked part-time jobs, saving up for books and supplies, because I didn't want to burden them. I thought about the art camp they said we couldn't afford, the used textbooks, the old laptop I'd patched together with duct tape and hope. And all that time, they'd had money, but not for me. The rage hit me like a freight train. I slammed the folder shut and stormed upstairs, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. My parents were in the kitchen, casually drinking coffee like nothing had happened. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, tossing the folder onto the table. Mom looked up, startled, while Dad frowned. "What are you talking about?" "This," I snapped, pointing at the folder. "Ethan's tuition. All these payments. All this money you said you didn't have when I needed it. You lied to me." They both stared at me, their faces a mix of confusion and guilt. "Sweetheart, it's not what you think." Mom started, but I cut her off. "Don't sweetheart me," I spat. "You told me you were saving for both of us. You told me I didn't have to worry about money. And the whole time, you were spending everything on him." Dad sighed, rubbing his temples like I was the one giving him a headache. "We had to make a choice," he said, his voice flat. "Ethan's law school was a good investment. He had a clear plan. You didn't seem to know what you wanted." The words hit me like a slap. "So that's it?" I said, my voice shaking. "You decided I wasn't worth it? You just gave up on me?" "It wasn't like that," Mom said, her tone defensive now. "We had to think about what would benefit the family the most." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The family? What about me? Am I not part of this family? They didn't have an answer for that. The silence was deafening, and I felt tears stinging my eyes. I hated myself for crying, but I couldn't stop. "You could have told me," I choked out. "You could have been honest. But instead, you lied to me. You made me believe you had my back, and you didn't." Dad finally spoke, his voice quiet. "We didn't think you'd understand." I laughed bitterly, wiping my face. "You're right. I don't understand. And I never will." Without another word, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. My hands were shaking as I got in the car, my vision blurry from the tears I was too angry to wipe away. As I drove away, my mind raced with questions I knew I'd never get answers to. How long had they been lying to me? Did they ever plan to tell me the truth? Or did they think I'd just never find out? One question stuck with me more than any other. Have you ever felt your heart break, not because of love, but because of betrayal by the people you trusted most? I didn't know if I'd ever be able to forgive them. But in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back. Not to their house, not to their lies. Not ever. I didn't plan to go back that soon. After storming out of their house with my anger boiling over, I told myself I needed time. Time to calm down, think, and decide what to do next. But that plan fell apart as quickly as my composure. 2 days later, I was back on their front porch, gripping my car keys so tightly they left little crescent marks in my palm. My anger hadn't subsided. If anything, it had grown, fueled by every memory that bubbled to the surface as I replayed their lies in my mind. I rang the doorbell, and Mom opened the door with a cautious smile. "Oh, honey, we weren't expecting." "We need to talk," I said, cutting her off as I brushed past her into the house. Dad was in the living room, watching some old Western on TV. He looked up, startled, when I marched in. "What's going on?" he asked, sitting up straighter in his recliner. I stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not here for small talk. I want answers. Real answers. No more lies." Mom followed me in, wringing her hands nervously. "Sweetheart, can't we just sit down and talk this out calmly?" I laughed bitterly. "Calmly? You want me to be calm? After what I found?" Dad sighed and muted the TV, his expression already shifting into that "let's be reasonable" look he always gave when he thought I was overreacting. "What exactly do you want to know?" "Everything," I snapped. "When did you decide Ethan was the golden child? When did you decide he was worth everything and I was worth nothing? When did you start lying to my face and telling me I had a future you had no intention of supporting?" Mom gasped softly, like I just slapped her. "That's not fair, and you know it," she said, her voice trembling. "Fair?" I shot back, my voice rising. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you told me not to worry about money while you were funneling every last dollar into his tuition? Was it fair when I had to scrape by, patching together used books and secondhand laptops, while he got whatever he needed handed to him?" Dad leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "It wasn't like that," he said firmly. We didn't just hand him anything. Ethan worked hard. He had a plan, a future. He knew what he wanted. We had to make choices, and his education was a good investment. A good investment, I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Great. I'm glad to know you see your children as investments. But what about me? What about my future? Did you ever stop to think about what you were taking from me? You didn't have a plan. Dad shot back, his voice rising now too. We asked you over and over what you wanted to do, and all we got were vague answers. Art? Writing? Those aren't careers, they're hobbies. That was the moment the words became a knife. I knew they thought that. I'd always suspected it. But hearing it out loud, like my dreams were nothing but childish whims, broke something inside me. So that's it, I said, my voice trembling. You decided I wasn't worth it. You didn't even give me a chance. Mom stepped in, her voice soft, almost pleading. We never said you weren't worth it. You were just different. Ethan had a clear path, and we had to make hard decisions. Hard decisions, I echoed. You mean easy decisions. It was easy for you to put him first, because he's always been first. Every competition, every award, every little thing he's done, you celebrated like it was the second coming of Christ. Meanwhile, I got a pat on the head and a "That's nice, dear." That's not true, Mom said, her eyes filling with tears. Isn't it? I shot back. Then why was there a folder with Ethan's name on it, full of bank statements and tuition receipts? Why didn't I get a folder? Why didn't I get even half of what you gave him? The room fell silent. They didn't have an answer for that. I looked at them, at the people I'd spent my entire life trusting, and felt like I didn't even know them anymore. Do you have any idea what it feels like to find out your parents didn't believe in you? I asked, my voice breaking. To know they thought you weren't good enough. Not even for a chance? Mom started to cry then, wiping at her face with shaking hands. We didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. We thought we were doing what was best for the family. I stared at her, incredulous. For the family? Or for Ethan? Dad didn't answer. He just sat there, staring at the floor. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, too wide to cross. I felt 1,000 things all at once, rage, sadness, betrayal. But underneath it all was a cold, empty numbness. I turned and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Mom called after me, her voice thick with desperation. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. I don't know, I said. But I can't stay here. I left without looking back, the sound of the door slamming behind me echoing in my ears. The bonds that had once tied me to them, to this house, to this family, were gone. And I didn't know if they could ever be repaired. When I left my parents' house that night, I thought the hardest part was over. I thought I'd get in my car, drive away, and never look back. But leaving wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of the unraveling. The first few days after the confrontation, I felt nothing but rage. It was this sharp, consuming kind of anger that took over everything. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My mind was on a loop, replaying every word of that argument, every lie they'd ever told me, every moment I'd spent believing I mattered as much as Ethan. I tried to distract myself. I buried myself in work, took on extra shifts, anything to keep my mind busy. But the anger was always there, bubbling just beneath the surface, waiting for any excuse to spill over. A coworker made a joke about family one day, something harmless, and I snapped at them so hard that they avoided me for the rest of the week. At night, it was worse. The quiet gave my thoughts too much room to breathe. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying memories I'd once cherished, but now couldn't look at without bitterness. Every family dinner, every birthday, every moment where they'd smiled at me and told me they were proud, it all felt like a lie now. I told myself I didn't need them, that I was better off without them. But the truth is, cutting ties with your parents isn't as simple as walking away. They're not just people, they're roots. And when you pull those roots out, you're left with this empty, gaping hole that nothing else can fill. Ethan reached out about a week later. He called me twice, but I ignored him both times. When he texted, I finally responded, mostly because I was curious what he had to say. Ethan, Mom told me what happened. Can we talk? What's there to talk about? Ethan, I didn't know. I swear I didn't. That made me pause. I didn't know if I believed him. Could he really have been so oblivious? Or was this just his way of absolving himself? Either way, I wasn't ready to have that conversation. Not right now. I didn't hear from him again for a while. Part of me wanted him to push harder, to fight for our relationship the way I'd always fought to feel seen in our family. But he didn't, and that silence felt like its own kind of betrayal. The isolation was the worst part. I didn't know how to explain what I was going through to anyone else. When people asked about my family, I lied. I said we were fine, that everything was normal because I couldn't bear the thought of laying it all out and seeing the pity in their eyes. My friends noticed something was off. "You've been quiet lately," one of them said over drinks one night. "I'm just tired," I replied, brushing it off. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was tired, exhausted really. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally. Carrying all that anger and sadness was like lugging around a bag of bricks everywhere I went. Even the smallest things would set me off. A family at the grocery store laughing together. A coworker talking about their parents with a smile on their face. A random Hallmark card in the aisle that read, "To the best mom and dad." It felt like the universe was mocking me, reminding me of what I'd lost, or maybe what I'd never really had. One night, after a particularly bad day, I found myself staring at my phone, scrolling through old photos. There was one of me and Ethan from years ago, both of us grinning like idiots with snow covering our faces. It was taken during one of the few snowstorms we'd had as kids, and we'd spent the whole day outside building a snowman. I stared at the photo for a long time, trying to reconcile the brother I'd grown up with and the man I barely knew now. Maybe he hadn't known about the money. Maybe he wasn't complicit. But that didn't change the fact that he'd benefited from their choices, that he'd gotten everything while I'd been left to fend for myself. I put the phone down and cried for the first time in years. Not the kind of crying where you wipe a tear away and move on. The kind that leaves you gasping for air, your whole body shaking, the weight of it pressing down on your chest until you feel like you might suffocate. It wasn't just about the money. It was about everything. The lies, the favoritism, the realization that my parents had never believed in me the way they'd believed in him. Over the next few weeks, I started to come to terms with the fact that things would never go back to how they were. The damage was too deep, the cracks too wide to bridge. I thought about reaching out to Ethan again, but every time I picked up the phone, I hesitated. What was the point? What could he say that would make any of this better? The loneliness didn't go away, but I learned to live with it. I told myself that maybe this was a chance to start fresh, to build a life on my own terms, without the weight of their expectations or disappointments. But even as I tried to move forward, one thought kept creeping back into my mind. How do you rebuild yourself when the people who were supposed to love you the most are the ones who broke you? The years that followed weren't easy. Walking away from my family felt like breaking a piece of myself off and leaving it behind. But I didn't have a choice. Staying would have meant swallowing my pride and pretending everything was okay. And I couldn't do that. Not after what I discovered. Not after the lies and betrayal. So, I did what I had to do. I started over. At first, it was about survival. I threw myself into work, taking on any extra hours or side gigs I could find. I wasn't just trying to make ends meet. I was proving a point. To myself. To them. To anyone who ever doubted me. There was no safety net, no one to call when things got tough. I learned how to budget down to the last dollar, how to fix things around my apartment instead of paying someone else to do it, how to push through exhaustion because taking a day off wasn't an option. I won't lie, it was brutal. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made the right decision, wondering if I could keep going without their support. But every time those doubts crept in, I reminded myself of what I'd been through. I reminded myself that if I could walk away from them, I could handle anything. Eventually, things started to turn around. I landed a better job, one with a steady salary and benefits. I moved into a slightly nicer apartment, one that didn't have a leaky roof or neighbors who screamed at each other every night. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. With every small victory, I felt a little stronger, a little more capable. I took pride in the fact that I'd built my life on my own, without anyone's help. And yet, there was always a shadow hanging over me. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just hurt, it changes you. It seeps into the way you see the world, the way you see other people. I became guarded, even cynical. Trusting people felt like a risk I couldn't afford to take. If my own parents could lie to me, if they could choose my brother over me so easily, how could I believe anyone else wouldn't do the same? Friendships felt shallow, like they could crumble at any moment. Relationships were even harder. Every time someone got too close, I'd find myself pulling away, scared of what might happen if I let my walls down. It wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about control. I couldn't control what my parents had done, but I could control who I let into my life. And if that meant keeping people at arm's length, so be it. Despite the loneliness, I managed to build something I was proud of. I got promoted at work, started saving for the future, even picked up painting again, something I hadn't done since high school. There was a satisfaction in knowing I'd succeeded on my own terms. Every milestone felt like a small victory over the version of me that had once believed I wasn't enough. But the bitterness never fully went away. No matter how far I'd come, there were moments when the old wounds felt fresh again. Like when I'd see coworkers talking about their parents with a fondness I couldn't imagine feeling. Or when holidays rolled around, and I'd spend them alone, pretending it didn't bother me. The hardest part was realizing that, deep down, I still wanted their approval. Even after everything they'd done, some small part of me craved their recognition, their acknowledgement that I'd made it without them. But I knew better than to reach out. One day, a coworker asked me why I never talked about my family. She'd been sharing a story about her mom and dad, and when she noticed I hadn't joined in, she pressed me. "What about you? Do you see your parents much?" I hesitated, trying to come up with a polite answer. "Not really," I said finally. "Why not?" I shrugged. "We're not that close?" It was an understatement, but I wasn't about to spill my life story in the middle of the break room. Still, her question stuck with me. Not because of what she said, but because of what I couldn't bring myself to say. How do you explain to someone that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally had instead turned you into a second-place priority? How do you make them understand that even years later, the scars are still there, hidden beneath the surface? Looking back, I'm proud of what I've accomplished. I've built a life I can stand on, one that doesn't rely on anyone else's validation or support. But there's a part of me that wonders what it might have been like if things had been different. If my parents had believed in me the way they believed in Ethan. If they'd seen my potential instead of dismissing my dreams as frivolous. Maybe I'd still be the same person I am today. Or maybe I'd be someone softer, someone less guarded. Someone who didn't feel the need to carry their independence like a shield. The truth is, I'll never know. All I know is that every success I've had has come with a mix of pride and sadness. Pride because I did it on my own, sadness because I had to. As much as I've tried to move on, I can't help but wonder, does healing ever feel complete when the people who hurt you don't even realize what they've done? It had been years since I'd last spoken to my parents. Years of silence, distance, and carefully constructed walls that I convinced myself were impenetrable. I'd moved on, or at least I told myself I had. I had a good job, a decent apartment, and a life that didn't rely on anyone but me. Then one day, the phone rang, and everything came crashing back. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I knew it instantly. That area code, those digits, I didn't have to see their name to know who it was. My heart sank as I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Hello." There was a pause, then a familiar voice I hadn't heard in years. "Hi, sweetheart. It's Mom." I almost hung up right then and there, but something in her voice stopped me. It wasn't the cheerful, sing-song tone I remembered. It was shaky, hesitant, almost desperate. We need to talk," she said. I agreed to meet them a few days later, more out of curiosity than anything else. I wanted to know what could have possibly prompted them to break years of silence. As I drove to the diner where we'd agreed to meet, I rehearsed every possible scenario in my head. Maybe they wanted to apologize. Maybe they wanted to explain. Maybe, just maybe, they'd finally realized how much they'd hurt me. When I walked in, I spotted them right away. They looked smaller somehow. Older, worn down by time in a way I hadn't expected. Dad's hair was almost completely gray, and Mom's face was lined with wrinkles that hadn't been there the last time I saw her. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something that almost resembled pity. But then I reminded myself why we were here. "Hi," I said, sliding into the booth across from them. My tone was flat, my expression guarded. Mom smiled nervously. "It's so good to see you." I didn't respond. Instead, I waited, crossing my arms as I leaned back in the seat. "What do you want?" I asked. They exchanged a glance, and Dad cleared his throat. "We need your help," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Help with what?" Mom sighed, folding her hands on the table like she was trying to hold herself together. "Things have been hard lately," she said. "Your father's been having some health issues, and money's tight. Ethan, he's not in a position to help right now." "Of course, Ethan." I bit back a bitter laugh. "So what? You thought I'd swoop in and save the day." Mom flinched, but Dad held my gaze. "We're not asking for a handout," he said. "We just need a little help getting back on our feet." I stared at them, my mind racing. The audacity of it all. After everything they'd done, or rather, not done, they had the nerve to come to me now, as their last hope. They didn't think twice about leaving me behind. So why should I feel guilty about doing the same? That thought played on a loop in my head as I sat there, silent, letting their words wash over me without really hearing them. The truth was, I didn't owe them anything. They'd made their choices, and those choices had consequences. But as much as I wanted to walk out of that diner and never look back, something inside me hesitated. I thought about the years I'd spent struggling to prove myself, to prove that I didn't need them. I'd built my life around this idea of independence, of not relying on anyone because no one had been there for me when I needed it. But what would walking away now prove? That I was better than them? That I could play the same game and win? Or would it just prove that their choices had shaped me more than I cared to admit? I don't know what you want from me, I said finally, my voice low but steady. I can't just forget everything that happened. You lied to me. You left me to figure things out on my own while you gave everything to Ethan. And now that he can't help you, you come to me? Why should I care? Mom's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, I saw genuine regret there. We made mistakes, she said softly. We thought we were doing what was best at the time. But we were wrong. We see that now. Dad nodded, his expression unreadable. We can't change the past, he said. But we're asking for a chance to make things right. Their words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. Part of me wanted to believe them, to let go of the anger and let them back in. But another part of me, the part that had spent years nursing those wounds, couldn't let it go that easily. I looked at them, at the people who had once been my whole world, and felt a wave of conflicting emotions, anger, sadness, even a flicker of love buried beneath it all. I'll think about it, I said finally, standing up and grabbing my coat. Mom reached out, her voice trembling. Thank you. I didn't respond. I just walked out of the diner, the cold air hitting my face as I stepped outside. I stood there for a moment, staring at the car keys in my hand, trying to decide what to do next. Because the truth was, I didn't know if I could forgive them. But I didn't know if I could live with myself if I didn't. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, staring at the diner in the rearview mirror. The engine idled, the heater humming softly, but I didn't move. My thoughts were too loud, crashing against each other like waves in a storm. Their voices were still ringing in my ears, a mix of desperation and regret. We made mistakes, Mom had said. We thought we were doing what was best. Best for whom? Not for me. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. It always would be, I think. How do you forgive people who made you feel like a second choice in your own family? How do you reconcile the love you once had for them with the betrayal that took its place? And yet, there was something else, something I didn't want to admit even to myself. A flicker of guilt. As much as I tried to bury it, a part of me still cared about them. I hated that I cared. I hated the part of me that still remembered the good moments, the times when we laughed around the dinner table, the nights Mom stayed up with me when I was sick, the afternoons Dad taught me how to ride my bike. It would have been easier if they'd been cruel or distant my whole life. But they hadn't been. They'd loved me in their own flawed way, and that made their betrayal cut so much deeper. They'd made their choices, yes, but hadn't I also made mine? The past wasn't something I could change. I couldn't go back and undo the years of resentment, the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering why I wasn't enough. But the future? That was still unwritten. What would walking away mean for me? Would it be an act of justice, a way to reclaim my power and show them that their actions had consequences? Or would it just be another scar, another weight to carry for the rest of my life? Because the truth was, walking away wouldn't erase the pain. It wouldn't undo the years of feeling invisible, nor would it heal the wounds they'd left behind. But helping them? That felt like a betrayal of myself. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, snapping me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen and saw a text from Ethan. Ethan, Mom told me what happened. I'm sorry you're in this position. If you need to talk, I'm here. I put the phone down without replying. Ethan's words felt hollow, even if he meant them sincerely. He'd had their full support his entire life. He'd been their priority, and now, when the roles were reversed, he wasn't the one being asked to sacrifice. I was. The longer I sat there, the heavier the weight of the decision became. If I helped them, what message would that send? That their actions had no consequences? That they could treat me as an afterthought and still count on me when things got tough? But if I didn't help them, what would that say about me? That I was no better than they were? That I was willing to let them suffer because of old wounds I couldn't let go? Neither choice felt right. I thought about all the times I'd wished for an apology, for some acknowledgement of the pain they'd caused me. And now that I'd gotten it, or at least some version of it, it felt hollow. Too little, too late. I thought about loyalty, about what it meant to stand by your family even when they didn't deserve it. Was it a sign of strength or weakness? Was it justice or surrender? And I thought about justice, about the version of me who had once believed in fairness, in the idea that people got what they deserved. Did I still believe that? Did I want to? When I finally turned the key in the ignition, I wasn't sure what I was driving toward. I knew I had a choice to make. I could help them, or I could walk away. I could take the high road, or I could let my resentment guide me. But whatever I chose, it wouldn't be about them. It would be about me, about the person I wanted to be and the life I wanted to live. Maybe I forgave them. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I helped them. Maybe I left them to figure it out on their own. Maybe I took the high road. Maybe I didn't. Either way, I made my choice. Now, what would you have done?